Hello, this is Adrian Cross, and this is a new original story from my channel, Labyrinths of Fate. Lena used to believe that some lives were protected by fate itself. She was the daughter of Viktor Sokolov, an oil magnate whose name had opened doors in boardrooms, ministries, and private clubs across the country. She had grown up in houses with marble staircases, in silence guarded by bodyguards, in a world where expensive things were ordinary, and danger always stayed at a polite distance. And yet, for all the wealth around her, Lena had never been spoiled. Her father was cold in public, feared in business, and almost impossible to impress. But with her, he could still be unexpectedly gentle. He taught her one lesson from childhood. Never trust people who appear in your life too quickly after a tragedy. According to him, grief made people blind. Grief made them needy. And nothing attracts predators faster than a wounded heart. But when Viktor Sokolov died, that lesson vanished beneath the weight of loss. The funeral was enormous. Politicians came, executives came. Men Lena had never seen before stood by the grave and spoke as though they had known her father's soul. Cameras flashed. Black cars lined the street. Everyone wore the same expression, rehearsed sorrow. But Lena barely saw any of it. She stood there like a shadow, hearing nothing but the dull echo of earth hitting wood. And through all of it, Igor never left her side. He was calm, attentive, patient. He held her elbow when her knees weakened. He answered the calls she could not bear to take. He shielded her from greedy relatives, from reporters, from fake friends who suddenly remembered her name. He seemed to know exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. To Lena, shattered by loss, he felt like the only solid thing left in a collapsing world. So when she married him only months later, nobody was truly surprised. People called him ideal, respectful, steady, protective, the kind of man any woman would be lucky to have. And at first, Lena believed that too. She thought she had survived the worst thing life could do to her. She thought the darkness had already passed. She was wrong, because sometimes a nightmare does not begin with a scream. Sometimes it begins with care, with tenderness, with a soft voice saying, "You should rest," with a hand offering you a glass of water, with a family member insisting they only want what is best for you. And in Lena's case, the nightmare entered her life in the form of her mother-in-law. Antonina Petrovna arrived in their home like a woman determined to help. She brought herbal teas, foreign vitamins, silk shawls, and endless concern. She spoke softly, moved slowly, smiled often, and always seemed to appear at the exact moment Lena felt weakest. At first, her attention seemed harmless. After all, Lena was grieving. She was sleeping badly, eating little, and trying to keep her father's enormous business empire from collapsing, while half the board was already circling like vultures. If Igor's mother wanted to take care of her, what was so strange about that? But within weeks, strange things began to happen. Lena would wake in the morning feeling as though someone had filled her veins with wet cement. Sometimes she would forget simple words in the middle of a sentence. Colors looked duller. Sounds felt distant. Time became slippery. An hour would disappear. Then another. She would sit down to read a document and suddenly find herself staring at the same line 10 minutes later, unable to remember what she had just read. Whenever she mentioned it, Antonina Petrovna had the same answer. "It's stress, dear. Your body is exhausted. You need support." Then came the pills. They were always presented gently, almost lovingly. Imported vitamins, special European supplements, something for sleep, something for the nerves, something to stabilize her after shock. Antonina would press them into her palm, with a smile so warm it felt rude to refuse. And Igor always supported her. "You've been through too much," he would say. "Please, Lena, just let her help." That was the phrase he used most often. Let her help. So Lena swallowed the pills, and day after day, the gray fog inside her mind grew thicker. She stopped attending some meetings because her head pounded too badly. She postponed legal reviews because the paperwork blurred in front of her eyes. Once, during a conversation with the company's chief financial officer, she lost her train of thought so completely that the man looked at her with something close to alarm. Another time, she signed a routine document and later could not remember signing it at all. That was when fear first entered the room. Not dramatic fear, not panic, something quieter, something colder. The creeping suspicion that she was no longer entirely in control of herself. Then, one evening, she noticed Antonina and Igor fall silent the moment she entered the room. The next day, a family lawyer she had never liked began asking unusually careful questions about power of attorney, guardianship, and mental stability in the event of prolonged emotional collapse. Lena laughed it off in the moment, but that night she could not sleep. For the first time since her father's death, she remembered his warning with painful clarity. Grief makes people blind, and she began to wonder whether she had been blind for far too long. The truth revealed itself just after midnight. Lena woke to the sound of voices drifting through the hallway. Her bedroom door was slightly open, and a thin line of light cut across the floor. For a few seconds she lay still, too tired to move. Then she heard Antonina Petrovna laugh. It was not the laugh of a caring older woman. It was sharp, dry, and ugly. "She's almost ready," Antonina whispered. "A little more and she'll sign anything. Another week, maybe 2. Then the doctors will confirm what we need." Igor's voice came next, calm, controlled, familiar enough to make Lena's skin crawl. "And the accounts? When she's declared incompetent, everything becomes manageable. Guardianship first, access second. The rest will follow." Lena did not breathe. "She still has moments of clarity," Igor said. "Then increase the dose," Antonina replied. "Stop behaving like a husband and start thinking like a man who is about to inherit an empire." For one terrible second, Lena thought her heart would give her away. She could hear it pounding against her ribs, so violently she was certain they would hear it from the next room. But the conversation continued, practical and cold, as if they were discussing repairs to a house rather than the destruction of her mind. That was the moment her grief ended. In its place came something cleaner, harder, and far more useful: determination. The next morning, Lena smiled, thanked Antonina for the pills, and pretended to swallow them. Later, locked inside her bathroom, she spat them into a tissue and stared at them in her palm for a long time. Tiny white tablets, so harmless looking, so easy to trust. After that, she began to act. She hid the pills. She replaced them with harmless absorbents and vitamin tablets from an old emergency medical kit. She forced herself to continue the performance, moving slowly, speaking as if her thoughts were heavy, letting Antonina believe the treatment was still working. It disgusted Lena to perform weakness in front of people who were trying to erase her. But survival demanded discipline. Within days, the fog in her mind began to lift, and with clarity came detail. She noticed Igor taking late-night calls on the terrace and lowering his voice whenever she approached. She noticed Antonina spending hours inside her father's old study, searching through shelves, drawers, folders, even the lining of desk compartments. She noticed the family lawyer returning twice in 1 week. She noticed an unsigned medical assessment left face down on a table, containing language about emotional instability, impaired judgment, and recommended supervision. Someone was building a legal cage around her. Lena knew she could not go to the police yet, not with suspicion alone, not with people like Igor already preparing paperwork and medical narratives. She needed proof, real proof, and there was only one person she could still trust. Alexei Morozov had once been her father's closest ally in law enforcement, before retiring years earlier. Lena remembered him as a broad-shouldered man with watchful eyes, and a habit of speaking only after everyone else had finished. Her father used to say that Alexei trusted no one quickly and forgot nothing ever. When Lena called him from a disposable phone bought in secret across town, he listened without interrupting. Then he said only one sentence: "From this moment on, assume that every smile in your house is a lie." Alexei moved carefully. He never came to the house. He never called her main number. He arranged meetings in crowded places, then changed locations at the last minute. He told Lena to photograph every pill before discarding it, to copy every document she could access, and to write down every date, every symptom, every suspicious conversation while her memory was clean. Within a week, a pattern began to emerge. The pills were not vitamins. Preliminary testing suggested a cocktail of sedatives and substances capable of impairing concentration, memory, and emotional stability over time. The medical language in the draft assessments had clearly been prepared in advance. Someone was planning not merely to weaken Lena, but to construct a believable legal case for stripping her of authority. But that was only the beginning. Alexei then examined Igor's background. At first glance, it was flawless. Too flawless. Education records that aligned perfectly. Financial history with no chaos. Travel that matched known events. References from respectable circles. The life of a polished, reliable man. But Alexei had spent enough years studying lies to recognize when a life had been arranged too neatly. He found the crack in Europe. 10 years earlier, the real Igor, the son of old family friends of Viktor Sokolov, had died in a car crash on a mountain road. There had been a funeral abroad, closed casket, minimal publicity, enough confusion, enough distance, enough grief to bury certainty with the body. And somehow, not long after that death, another man stepped into the empty identity. The papers were altered slowly over years. Appearances were managed. Introductions were controlled. Access was built patiently. By the time Lena met him, the imposter had already been living inside another man's name for so long that even he may have begun to believe it. And Antonia Petrovna? She was not his mother. She was a repeat offender with a history of fraud, document manipulation, and financial schemes conducted through fake charities and shell companies. Years ago, she had taken a boy from an orphanage, moved through several countries, and disappeared from official view. Alexei believed she had trained him from childhood, not as a son, but as an instrument. Lena listened in silence while he laid out the evidence. Every answer created a new horror. The man she had married had never existed. The family she had entered had been manufactured. The affection, the patience, the marriage itself, all of it had been an operation. But Alexei was still troubled by one question. If they only wanted your signature, he told her, they would have moved faster. They're looking for something else, something specific, something your father hid. That changed everything. Until then, Lena had assumed the plan was simple. Drug her, isolate her, declare her unfit, take control. But if Antonina had been searching through the study, if Igor had been delaying instead of rushing, then they were not only hunting her fortune, they were hunting a missing piece. And if her father had hidden something, there was only one place he might have hidden it: his abandoned satellite office on the edge of the city. The office had been closed since before Viktor Sokolov's death. It stood in an industrial district where the streetlights hummed, the windows of neighboring warehouses were dark, and the city felt far away, even when it was only a few miles behind you. Lena went there alone just before dawn, carrying a flashlight, a copied keycard, and the kind of fear that sharpens every sound. Inside, the building smelled of paper, dust, and old electricity. Desks were covered in sheets. Filing cabinets stood open like broken teeth. Somewhere deep in the ventilation, metal clicked softly as the temperature changed. Her father had used this office for sensitive matters, deals too delicate for headquarters, conversations too dangerous for assistants. If he had hidden anything from the board, from lawyers, or from enemies, this was where he would have done it. For nearly an hour, Lena found nothing. She searched the desk, the wall panels, backs of drawers, the underside of shelves. She was on the verge of leaving when she remembered something absurdly small: her father's habit of tapping his ring twice against metal whenever he lied in public. Once, as a child, she had asked him why he did it. He told her that people always need a place to hide the truth. Some use words, some use walls. The safe. It was built behind a framed map on the far wall. Lena entered the old code she still remembered, but the inner compartment looked empty. For one sickening moment, she thought she had come too late. Then her fingers brushed an uneven edge. There was a false panel. Behind it lay a sealed envelope, a packet of original DNA documents, and a handwritten letter addressed to her. Lena sat down before opening it, because suddenly her knees would not hold her. The letter was short, but every line carried weight. Her father wrote that he had discovered the imposture long before his death. He had confirmed that the man calling himself Igor was a fraud, but he had delayed exposing him because he was trying to protect something larger, a truth buried much deeper in the family's past. Years earlier, during one of the ugliest periods of his life, Viktor Sokolov had fathered a son outside marriage. The child had been taken away after pressure, scandal, and silence arranged by people with power and pride. Viktor had spent years trying to find him. When he finally succeeded, he did not reveal the truth publicly. Instead, he watched from a distance, wanting certainty before he changed multiple lives at once. That certainty came through DNA. The documents in Lena's hands proved it. Her father's lost son was alive. More than that, he had been working for years as an ordinary mechanic in one of the corporation's logistics warehouses, under another surname, never knowing who his real father was. Lena realized, in one dizzy flash of understanding, why Antonina and the imposter had searched so desperately. The inheritance was bigger than money. If the hidden heir was acknowledged, control of the empire would shift. Old wills would be challenged. Power would move. Ownership would change. This was what they had been hunting. And now, at last, Lena had found it first. But she was not alone in the building. She heard the footsteps before she saw him, slow at first, then faster, confident, coming straight down the corridor toward the office. Lena folded the letter once, slipped the documents into her bag, and stood. By the time the door burst open, her face was calm. The imposter entered with a gun in his hand. For the first time since she had known him, all charm was gone. No tenderness, no controlled concern, no patient husband. What stood in front of her now was the real man beneath the stolen name, frightened, cornered, and vicious. "Give me the envelope," he said. Lena said nothing. He stepped closer. "You have no idea what you're holding." "No," she replied quietly. "I know exactly what I'm holding." His eyes flickered. He had not expected that voice. He had expected confusion, weakness, panic, the broken woman they had been trying to manufacture. Instead, he found someone who had already escaped them. "You should have stayed obedient," he said. "And you should have stayed dead," Lena answered. Something in his face cracked. He raised the gun higher, but his hand was not steady. Men like him are often brave only while the victim still believes the performance. Once the mask fails, fear begins. "Do you think anyone will believe you?" he snapped. "You've been drugged for weeks. The reports are ready. The doctors are ready. By tomorrow, they'll say you imagined everything." Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the words that ended him. "You lost. The police are already in the building, and the real heir to this empire is standing right behind you." He turned instinctively. The corridor was suddenly full of movement. Armed officers, Alexei Morozov, and beside them, wearing a worn mechanic's jacket and the stunned expression of a man whose entire life had just been ripped open, stood Viktor Sokolov's hidden son. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same jaw, the same impossible stillness in the face of chaos. The gun fell from the imposter's hand before anyone touched him. Within seconds, he was on the floor in handcuffs. Antonina Petrovna was arrested the same morning, trying to leave the city with cash, forged documents, and a second passport. Once investigators opened the financial trail, the case widened rapidly. There were fake medical files, shell companies, tax crimes, identity theft, prior fraud schemes. There was also evidence suggesting they had used similar methods before against other vulnerable people with money and no protection. What had happened to Lena was not their first attempt. It was simply the largest. The scandal shook the company for months. The board split. Lawsuits began. Reporters swarmed. Old allies resurfaced. Hidden deals were dragged into daylight. And through all of it, Lena did something few had expected from a woman they had nearly erased. She stayed standing. A year later, the empire had been restructured. The lost heir, once a mechanic in a warehouse, had been publicly recognized and given his rightful place in the family and the business. He never became a prince from a fairy tale. He remained quiet, cautious, and almost uncomfortable with wealth. But he was honest, and for the first time in years, honesty had value again in the house her father built. As for Lena, she reclaimed her name, her authority, and the life they tried to steal from her. She established a foundation for victims of fraud, coercive control, and psychological abuse. She spoke publicly only a few times, but when she did, people listened. Not because she was rich, not because she was powerful, but because she had looked betrayal in the face and survived it without becoming cruel herself. The imposter and Antonina Petrovna each received 15 years in a maximum security prison. In the end, justice did not arrive with dramatic music or perfect timing. It arrived slowly, through evidence, patience, and the refusal of one woman to disappear. And maybe that is the cruelest ending for people like them. Not merely prison, not merely disgrace, but the simple fact that the woman they tried to turn into a shadow became the one who brought them into the light. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to support the channel with a like. It truly helps our community grow. This was Labyrinths of Fate, and I'm Adrian Cross. Until next time.